With the penultimate season of House of the Dragon ending with a bang, I must confess that although the show has deviated heavily from the book, some of the changes have been extremely sensible. And another thing I want to note is that we should remember how the Fire and Blood novel was simply a collection of accounts given by people who weren't really there to witness those events, with the exception of the Fool Mushroom, but then his testimony is usually way off and exaggerated. Naturally, the TV series should be considered the truest version of events, and with that in mind, let's dive straight into all 27 major differences between House of the Dragon Season 3 versus the Fire and Blood novel.
The one betrayer. Rhaenyra should never have given the reins to such immeasurable power to someone so fickle, dishonorable, and cowardly as Ulf, and his arc is probably the biggest change in the season finale. The man misses most of the first battle of Tumbleton sleeping drunk and naked on a commode, only to be woken up with kicks and punches from Lord Ormund Hightower. The Dragonseed then goes on to lay waste to Queen Rhaenyra's army gathered outside the market town of Tumbleton, before turning around and burning Ormund Hightower, who had just been given the most proper by Roderick Dustin. But in the Fire and Blood novel, the other Dragonseed, Hugh Hammer, joins Ulf White in the betrayal, and they both fight for the Greens after defecting from the Blacks. However, I don't think that Hugh Hammer would stay by Rhaenyra's side in Season 4, the final season of the show. You see, his beloved wife, Cat, has been killed at Tumbleton, presumably by Black soldiers, or at least that's what he's thinking. And he'd blame Rhaenyra for this, which would make it hard for him to stay on her side. Helena's death. Helena's death is going to bring about a monumental change to the socio-political dynamics in the show. Loved by one and all alike, Helaena Targaryen has proven her loyalty to her husband and king, Aegon. When the recently fired Lady Mysaria informs her about the rise of Aegon and his dragon Sunfyre, Helaena gets hopeful, but then Mysaria also tells her that she would only remain a pawn at the hands of Rhaenyra, who would hold her and her unborn son hostage in perpetuity. But Helaena doesn't want to give Rhaenyra that advantage and jumps from the window of Maegor's Holdfast and lands on the spikes beneath. Now, the way she dies is similar to her death from Fire and Blood, but the reasons stated in the two materials are fairly different. You see, in the book, it's believed that Helaena plunged to her death after learning the rather distressing news of her younger son Maelor's death, who was basically lynched by people while he was being escorted away. On top of this, she had to witness the brutal decapitation of her older son Jaehaerys, which had broken an already fragile woman. Upon hearing the news of Maelor's death, a child she had offered up to Blood and Cheese earlier instead of Jaehaerys, Helaena could not deal with the compounded grief and died. However, small folk claim that Helaena was killed on Rhaenyra's orders. There was already a lot of tension in King's Landing before this suicide, and Helena's death pushed the people further. So much so that the small folk not only attacked the Red Keep, but also the Dragon Pit. And the event will come to be known in history as the Storming of the Dragon Pit, in which several dragons lost their lives. Alys Rivers' origins. One of the more interesting details that the book never really mentioned, but the show very well clarified, was the origin and backstory of Alys Rivers, the resident goth girl of Harrenhal, that cursed castle where several Haypenny lords have come to rule over the 100 years since Aegon the Dragon burned the place to end the line of King Harren the Black, the former lord of Harrenhal and the king of the Riverlands. The book never really mentions what went on between Alys and Aemond during their time together, but the show is actually dabbling into that aspect, and we learn of Alys's origin from one of her most emotional scenes. She explains that when Balerion the Black Dread attacked the castle with his black flames, one child of Harren the Black did survive, heavily burnt but alive, and so did his mother, who called every old maester from the Seven Kingdoms, but to no avail. That's when she dabbled into the dark arts and sorcery and even sought help from the mysterious Green Men, but also to no avail. Nothing could unmake what the dragon had made, and the child passed away anyway. That's when the mother tried to take her own life and was shocked to realize that she had become immortal, someone who was bound to roam the castle and its surrounding lands and serve its many lords. And now, it's in Aemond that she finally found some solace, for how similar they are in more ways than one. In fact, Aemond just called her his betrothed in the Season 3 finale, which was not really the case in the book, where she does get pregnant with his child, but they never get married, nor were they supposed to. I'm intrigued to find out what happens next in the complicated and curious romance of Aemond and Alys, the 100-year-old woman and the ultimate sex symbol for someone like Aemond, who just loves himself an older woman. Daemon and Aemond were not anywhere near the Battle of Tumbleton. Well, the Battle of Tumbleton took place very differently in the book. For instance, Sir Roderick Dustin was the one who killed Ormund for good and not our boy Ulf the White. Furthermore, Hugh Hammer never entered Tumbleton on foot to find Cat, and Oscar Tully did not fight the first Battle of Tumbleton. Now, while there are plenty of these differences, the biggest one here is that we see Daemon leading the Black forces at the battle, but that's not where he was present during the battle. Daemon was still looking for Aemond with Nettles, the girl who was cut from the show and merged with the character of Lady Rhaena Targaryen. Additionally, at the end of the episode, we see that Daemon is going after Silverwing and Ulf, while Aemond follows him on Aegon. Well, at this point in the book, Aemond had become a Dracarys happy dragon rider who was terrorizing the Riverlands by burning entire towns and castles and anyone who supported the Blacks. Additionally, the whole arc between Aemond and Aegon that we see in the show never really happened in the book, where Aemond remained faithful to his brother and the Green Cause. In fact, Aegon himself never really traveled to Harrenhal in Fire and Blood. Rhaena's merging with Nettles. One of the biggest changes in House of the Dragon Season 3 Episode 1 was about Rhaena because the series essentially gave her the role that belonged to Nettles. In Fire and Blood, Nettles was a major dragon seed, so her removal and merger with Rhaena became extremely divisive. In fact, this creative decision also sat at the center of the very public disagreement between George R.R. Martin and Ryan Condal. Now, Book Nettles had claimed Sheepstealer and participated in battle with firm control over him. She understood her dragon and did not have to guess what he might do next. The series handled the situation very differently because Rhaena bonded with Sheepstealer and then accidentally joined the battle during their first flight together. Neither of them had been prepared for war. Sheepstealer had never served as a trained battle dragon, while Rhaena had no proper experience as his rider. So once they reached the fight, everything fell apart very quickly. Sheepstealer went into a frenzy and attacked ships from both sides. He targeted the Triarchy fleet, but he also killed Velaryon men who should have been Rhaena's allies. Worse, his unpredictable attacks disrupted the entire battle and distracted Jace and Bela at the worst possible moment. The dragon even attacked Bela on Moondancer and Jace on Vermax. Jace flew too close to the water, which made Vermax an easier target for the additional grappling hooks. Bela tried to free him again, but arrows struck Moondancer and forced her to retreat. After more hooks and a prolonged struggle, Vermax was finally dragged beneath the water. So yeah, while Nettles had helped the Blacks tremendously in the book, Rhaena made this battle much worse. I would still place most of the blame here for Jace's death on Jace himself, because he joined the fight with only Bela to help him. However, Rhaena certainly contributed to the disaster. Vermax had enough speed to escape, but Sheepstealer's interference removed that chance. Having said that, I actually thought the change made practical sense. The book's Sheepstealer had bonded well with Nettles and obeyed her, but this version had never received training from birth like the dragons of King's Landing or Dragonstone. He neither understood High Valyrian commands nor had any reason to follow them, so his wild and disobedient behavior felt believable. Jace locked up Rhaenyra while Aegon never boarded Gay Abandon. Jace had practically written his own death when he locked up Rhaenyra and joined the Battle of the Gullet without her. This was a major departure from Fire and Blood, where his reason for joining the battle was completely different. In the book, Prince Aegon, Rhaenyra's son through Daemon, and Prince Viserys traveled aboard Gay Abandon when the Triarchy attacked. Aegon escaped upon his dragon to return to Dragonstone, but Viserys was captured. Jace then flew out both in retaliation and to rescue his brother, while Ulf the White, Hugh Hammer, Nettles, and Adam of Hull accompanied him. The series kept both princes safely in the Eyrie. Once news of the Triarchy fleet arrived, Rhaenyra wanted to lead the attack upon Syrax. Jace objected because her death could have destroyed their cause, but when she refused to listen, he ordered Sir Laurent Marbrand to lock her up. Laurent, by the way, was the second King's Guard to reach Dragonstone after Aegon became king. The first had been Sir Eric Cargill. Had Jace allowed Rhaenyra to leave, Syrax would have added a much larger dragon to the battle. Rhaenyra also had greater experience and might have saved Jace, driven Sheepstealer away, or perhaps even calmed him. Honestly, I expected at least 5 dragons against the Triarchy, including Vermithor and Silverwing. Both ranked among Westeros' largest living dragons, and could have challenged Vhagar. Aemond never declared himself king. When Alicent returned to King's Landing after her visit to Dragonstone, where she had planned Aegon's death, she found Aemond sitting upon the Iron Throne. He claimed that his elder brother had abdicated and fled in fear, then declared himself king despite having no crown. Now, none of this happened in Fire and Blood. Book Aemond never actively pursued his brother's death, and he didn't deliberately burn Aegon during the battle at Rook's Rest. More importantly, when Aegon escaped King's Landing, Aemond was nowhere near the capital. He'd already traveled to Harrenhal because he wanted to find and kill Daemon. As a result, Aemond remained unaware of what had happened in King's Landing, and did not learn that Rhaenyra had captured the throne until much later. Needless to say, the news left him furious. So yeah, Book Aemond never occupied the Iron Throne as King of Westeros, while the series allowed him to claim the crown for himself. Aegon's capture after fleeing from King's Landing. In Fire and Blood, Aegon escaped King's Landing once Rhaenyra's victory and his execution appeared inevitable. Larys Strong arranged the escape while Prince Jaehaera and Prince Maelor accompanied them. Jaehaera then traveled to Storm's End under Sir Willis Fell's protection, whereas Rickard Thorne took Maelor toward Old Town. Maelor later met a gruesome fate, but that belonged to another discussion. The series had Aegon leave with Larys alone. His location remained mysterious for ages in the book, but the show followed him through the Crownlands, where men who appeared to be soldiers from Rook's Rest captured him. I mean, that felt like poetic justice because Prince Rhaenys and her dragon had died there, while Lord Staunton was believed to have fallen because Aemond and Vhagar. Book Aemond eventually hid on Dragonstone, right beneath the Blacks' noses. Larys knew it would be the last place they would search for him. Now, the series had already prepared Alfred Brune for another betrayal. Rhaenyra sent him to discover whether Daemon's Harrenhal army served her or himself. Brune abandoned her cause and encouraged Daemon to claim the crown, but Alys Rivers basically made Daemon watch Game of Thrones in Season 7 and 8. Once Daemon bent the knee to Rhaenyra, Brune fled. In the book, after Aegon returned upon Sunfyre, Brune killed Dragonstone's Castellan while Rhaenyra occupied the Iron Throne. So yeah, I expected the series to have Brune betray the Blacks again and support Aegon once he finally reached Dragonstone. Aemond was never bedridden at Harrenhal. The attack on Harrenhal began while Criston Cole waited in the woods for word from Aemond. Once Vhagar passed overhead, it became clear that the One-Eyed Prince had arrived. Meanwhile, Book Aegon had taken Jaehaera with him when he fled. Aemond reached Harrenhal during the second episode and did what Targaryens with enormous dragons usually do. He burned the soldiers outside, surrounded the castle with fire, and allowed the flames to spread through its halls. Needless to say, nobody could offer much resistance. However, the timeline differed in Fire and Blood. Aemond reached Harrenhal while Aegon remained in King's Landing, and he only learned about Rhaenyra's capture of the capital while he stayed at the castle. In the series, Aemond came to Harrenhal and personally killed the surviving soldiers. He found Symon Strong and his sons halfway through a meal and demanded to know where Daemon had gone. Symon calmly wiped his lips and admitted that Daemon was absent. Aemond ordered Symon to draw his sword, but Symon had no weapon and preferred to bargain. Aemond had come for blood, so he killed Symon and one of his sons. The other son stabbed Aemond through the back, although Aemond still managed to kill him. Once Alys appeared, the wound finally overwhelmed him. Aemond dropped his sword, dragged himself toward her, begged for help, and lost consciousness. Now, none of that happened in the book. Nobody came close to injuring Aemond, and he executed every member of House Strong instead. He took Alys as a spoil of war and basically to his bed, or perhaps because of her witchcraft, and spared her alone from the castle's household. The series preserved that exception, but it left Aemond bedridden and dependent upon her. With the other Strongs dead, Larys became the last surviving member of the family. The many changes in the battle by the Lakeshore. In the Riverlands, Roddy Dustin and his Winter Wolves displayed the severed head of Lord Jace Lannister, who had led the Greens during the battle by the Lakeshore. The men then sang about the fish feed, which was also the battle's name in Fire and Blood. Countless Lannister soldiers had died among the lakeside reeds or drowned during their escape, so their bodies literally became food for fish. Symon Strong had arrived with gifts for Daemon and his army, along with a letter from Rhaenyra. However, Book Daemon had never participated in the battle by the Lakeshore or the earlier battles that the series placed in Episode 1. Through Symon's message, Daemon learned about Jace's death and received orders to return to Dragonstone. From there, he was supposed to accompany Rhaenyra when she traveled to King's Landing. Before he left, Daemon met Alys Rivers again. She had helped the Black cause and had also basically warned him about Game of Thrones Season 7 and 8. Now, Alys wanted Harrenhal as her reward because she claimed that nothing else could satisfy her mysterious hunger. This entire encounter was created for the series. Daemon refused her request, so Alys told him never to return. That rejection clearly created the first serious divide between them, and may explain why she later drew Aemond toward her, which also happened in the book. The many changes in the fall of King's Landing. Broadly speaking, the fall of King's Landing remained similar to Fire and Blood, but the series altered almost every micro detail as far as Rhaenyra's arrival is concerned. We know that the Dragonseed lineup had already been changed because of how Nettles and Adam were handled. while the episode also added Hugh's wife Kat inside the city. She saw Hugh upon his dragon before she hid. The series also turned the takeover into a direct assault through the Red Keep. Daemon and Rhaenyra arrived upon Caraxes and Syrax, after which most guards surrendered. Others resisted inside, so Daemon and Rhaenyra cut their way toward the throne room. Sir Rickard then blocked their path and demanded that Rhaenyra leave. However, Book Rickard had become one of the two Kingsguard who accompanied Aegon and his children during their escape. So, the show instead kept him on the inside of the Red Keep until Sir Luthor and the Gold Cloaks arrived. They declared for Daemon, their former commander, and recognized Rhaenyra as their true heir, which forced the remaining Kingsguard to surrender. Their largest changes were with respect to Otto Hightower. In the series, Larys has secretly left Otto in prison within the Black Cells as a gift for Daemon. Orwyle knew that Aegon had fled and offered another prisoner who might satisfy Daemon, but none of this happened in the book. Otto had not been imprisoned by Larys, and Orwyle knew nothing about the scheme. Rhaenyra personally executed Otto after Daemon presented him as Aegon's substitute. Her first strike hit his back before her second removed his head. The book confirmed Otto's death but never identified his executioner, so the series made this Rhaenyra's first direct kill and tied her claim to bloodshed. Master of Laws Jasper Wilde received a different end as well. Daemon killed him while he was still talking, whereas Book Wilde asked that his sons received inheritance priority under Andal tradition. Finally, the series also shows Alicent and Helena's failed escape in disguise. Guards dragged them back after Rhaenyra took the throne, which allowed Alicent to see Otto's remains and confront her former friend across the throne room. Rhaena never sought asylum in the Vale. The series gave Rhaena an entirely new conflict after she helped turn the Battle of the Gullet against Jace. She returned to the Vale with Sheepstealer and begged Lady Jane for asylum. Although she never explained exactly what she had done, Jane understood enough and initially ordered her to leave. But Rhaena reminded her that the Vale finally had the dragon it had always wanted. None of this happened in Fire and Blood. Book Sheepstealer divided his time between Dragonstone and Driftmark rather than the Vale. Meanwhile, Rhaena remained safely in the Vale throughout the war and later received her own pink dragon, Mourning. The difference exists because the series merged Rhaena with Nettles. Show Rhaena believed nobody had seen her ride Sheepstealer, although Jace had. Jane eventually allowed her to remain but demanded that they never meet again. Rhaenyra refusing to legitimize the Velaryon bastards. Now the series changed the entire matter of Adam and Alan's legitimacy. Corlys finally admitted to Rhaenyra that they were his sons and asked her to recognize them as Velaryons. More importantly, he wanted Alan named as his heir, but that could happen only if Rhaenyra legitimized them. Rhaenyra first delayed her answer, and then after the 3 dragonseeds received knighthoods, she still addressed Adam as Sir Adam of Hull rather than Sir Adam Velaryon. Corlys raised the matter again, but Rhaenyra admitted that she couldn't grant his request at the moment. Her reason made sense because she'd spent years under the whispers about the bastardy of Jace, Luke, and Joffrey. If she suddenly granted public favor to bastards, her enemy would have used that decision against her. Jace's death had also left her without an immediate heir, which forced her to call one from the Vale. Corlys should have understood that problem better than anyone. He had refused to claim Adam and Alan for decades because of guilt and shame. But once he had no heir, he suddenly wanted everyone to accept it. So yeah, his outrage felt rather hypocritical. In Fire and Blood, Corlys requested their legitimization after Adam claimed Seasmoke, although he presented both brothers as Laenor's sons rather than his own. Jace was still alive and supported the request, which convinced Rhaenyra to approve it. Both brothers became Velaryons, while Adam became the heir to Driftmark instead of Alan. Rhaenyra never met the High Septon. Rhaenyra's meeting with the High Septon was entirely a creation of the series. In Fire and Blood, she never saw his approval or asked him to perform another coronation. Instead, she paid for an extremely lavish coronation herself. Even Aegon's coronation did not have the High Septon because he was considered too old and frail to travel from Oldtown, the ancestral seat of the faith. Septon Eustace crowned Aegon instead, and he later wrote The Reign of King Viserys, first of his name, and The Dance of the Dragons that came after, which presented a pro-green version of the war. Furthermore, the High Septon did not permanently move to King's Landing until Baelor the First Targaryen's reign. So yeah, the series heavily altered the Faith's role. The man Rhaenyra met had also crowned Aegon in Season 1. His identity had caused some confusion, but revised credits before Season 3 confirmed that he was High Septon Balmond rather than High Septon Eustace. In fact, we saw in the last episode that Rhaenyra has the High Septon killed by Sir Alan of Hull, which is also an invention of the TV show, and a largely dumb decision, because in doing so, Rhaenyra just ensured that the small folk are going to rise against her in huge numbers. Aegon II was never declared dead. The series had Alicent advise Rhaenyra to declare Aegon dead because the burns and wounds from Rook's Rest had made him difficult to recognize. If he never returned for the throne, Rhaenyra could dismiss him as an impostor. But of course, when Aegon actually rose, he came with his dragon, so there was no way he could be called an impostor. In Fire and Blood, Rhaenyra did the exact opposite. She ordered a manhunt for the usurper who called himself Aegon II, and demanded that his remaining children, Jaehaera and Maelor, be found as well. In the series, Jaehaera had remained inside the Red Keep, while Maelor hadn't even been born. Honestly, I was glad about that because his death in the book was even worse than Jaehaerys's. Ormund did not use a fake Daeron. The fake Daeron, or Farron plot, never occurred in Fire and Blood. In the series' cold open from episode 3, Ormund Hightower's Reach army faced Daemon, Caraxes, Ulf, and Hugh. Daemon announced that Rhaenyra sat her father's throne and offered mercy for fealty, so Ormund surrendered. Daemon then demanded Prince Daeron as his hostage. Daeron, Viserys' youngest son, had grown up in Old Town and served as Ormund's squire. The book had sent him there at 12, whereas the series made him much younger and nearly Jace's age. Ormund secretly handed Daemon another boy, which created one huge problem. If he was Daeron, why did Sarah neither react nor follow her writer despite their psychic bond? This trick had no place in Daeron's book story, although false identities existed elsewhere. Jane Poole became fake Arya to remarry Ramsay, while young Griff claimed to be Rhaegar and Elya's supposedly dead son. Treatment of Alicent and Orwyle. Grand Maester Orwyle got way more respect in the series than he ever got under Rhaenyra in Fire and Blood. Rhaenyra could not understand why Ormund Hightower had occupied Tumbleton. As she put it, he may as well have painted a rondel on his chest. However, she couldn't rain dragonfire upon a house that had raised her banners, nor could she allow the Green Army to remain there. Orwyle offered a solution and advised her to send Daemon's men toward Tumbleton rather than King's Landing. Rhaenyra liked the idea, gave him a place on her council, and allowed him to remain Grand Maester, provided he proved loyal and useful. However, the book treated him very differently. Soon after Rhaenyra captured King's Landing, 4 Goldcloaks arrested Orwyle while he tried to send ravens under Alicent's orders. Those messages had requested help for the city's defense. Orwyle was thrown into the black cells with the other Green supporters and remained there until much later. Alicent's treatment had also changed considerably. In the book, she wore golden fetters and remained a prisoner. The series gave her much more respect, while Rhaenyra repeatedly sought her advice. During episode 4, Rhaenyra questioned her about Ormund and later told her that Otto's remains had been sent to Old Town with good men. I mean, this went well beyond one episode because Rhaenyra almost treated Alicent like an unofficial hand, which was nowhere close to their relationship in the book. Cole's Harrenhal strategy was reversed. When Cole's army reached Harrenhal in the series, Aemond and Vhagar had left the castle in an even worse state. Alys appeared and asked whether they were lost, but she refused to reveal Aemond's location. Instead, she claimed that the entire strong line had ended. Cole was completely shaken once he learned that Rhaenyra had captured King's Landing. Gwaine Hightower suggested that they regroup with Ormund at Tumbleton, which sounded like an obvious move, but Cole refused. He chose to hold the Riverlands and buy Ormund more time to strengthen his forces. Since the Greens lacked dragons, Cole planned to avoid open battle and launch attacks from the darkness. So yeah, surrender was nowhere in his mind. Fire and Blood handled this very differently because Ormund had remained at Harrenhal with Cole, while Gwaine was not even present. The Gold Cloaks had already killed him during Rhaenyra's capture of King's Landing. Later, the combined forces of Aemond and Cole were caught in a pincer move arranged by the Blacks, while Rhaenyra had taken the Iron Throne. Aemond and Cole then disagreed over their next move and parted ways. In a complete reversal of the series, Cole wanted to march through the Riverlands and joined Ormund Hightower's hosts. He left Harrenhal with around 3,600 men and headed toward Ormund, Daeron Targaryen, and his dragon. Aemond, meanwhile, had become consumed by rage and began to set the Riverlands ablaze. Cole did not use guerrilla warfare techniques in the book. The series gave Cole the idea of guerrilla warfare against the Blacks, but Fire and Blood did the complete opposite. The Riverlords and Winter Wolves used those tactics against him. After King's Landing fell, Cole and Aemond argued that Harrenhal had split their forces. Cole planned to join Ormund Hightower and Prince Daeron, while Aemond chose to devastate the Riverlands with Vhagar. He hoped this Scorched Earth campaign would force Rhaenyra to send her dragon riders after him. Cole then led his army south along the western shore of the God's Eye, and this was where the book's guerrilla warfare actually began. The Blacks destroyed villages and poisoned wells along his route to deny him supplies. They also struck from ambush and used psychological warfare to wear his men down. So yeah, Cole did not invent these methods in the book because he and his army were the ones trapped by them. The changed dynamic between Ormund and Daeron. The series completely changed the relationship between Ormund Hightower and Daeron. At Tumbleton, Ormund received a message from the Gold Cloak killers that read, "Gold blood spilled, 3 marked in the tally, the account lies open." He then visited Daeron during a history lesson which the prince had called dry until one look from Ormund made him reconsider that opinion rather fast. As Daeron repeated the lesson, he forgot Maria Martell. Ormund reminded him that she was known as the Yellow Toad of Dorne and had been the only woman truly gifted with a true military mind. She and her Dornish forces had resisted dragons as well as the full weight of Targaryen power. Daeron later defeated Ormund in a board game, but the boy was so afraid of him that he apologized for the victory. The major difference was what Ormund had actually taught him. Instead of House Targaryen's history, Daeron had learned about House Hightower. Ormund then revealed gold coins that carried Daeron's face as king, which confirmed that he had secretly prepared the prince for the Iron Throne. None of this happened in Fire and Blood. Book Ormund never groomed Daeron as a rival king or formed a separate faction around him. The series had made his loyalty quite more selfish because he seemed devoted to his own cause rather than the Greens or House Targaryen. Honestly, I like this change because it added another claimant and another party to the war. In fact, the game between Ormund and Daeron also created a timeline problem. This game had not reached Westeros during the Dance of the Dragons. It arrived in Dorne only in 299 AC, long after the war had ended, and a trade galley from Volantis had brought it there. I mean, unless Ormund secretly controlled time as well as Daeron, that game had no business on this table. The Blacks never used caltrops. The series had the Blacks scatter caltrops, which it called crow's feet, to slow Cole's march. However, Fire and Blood never recorded the use of that weapon against his army. The book had the Blacks rely upon psychological warfare instead, and honestly their method was way more disturbing. As Cole's forces marched from Harrenhal toward King's Landing, they repeatedly found corpses from the fish feed arranged along their path. By the time the army reached Crossed Elms, these displays had become so common that Cole ordered his men to ignore them. Of course, that decision immediately came back to hurt him because the next group of apparent corpses were Murish sellswords who had waited in ambush. They suddenly attacked and killed 12 men before Cole's forces drove them away. A different Black Small Council. The series gave Sabbatha Frey a place on Rhaenyra's Small Council after she finally arrived in King's Landing. That seat served as a reward because Sabbatha had allowed the Winter Wolves to cross the Twins. In return for House Frey's support, the late Prince Jace had promised them control of Harrenhal. None of that happened in Fire and Blood. Sabbatha never traveled to King's Landing, and Rhaenyra never offered her a seat on the Small Council. She did capture Harrenhal after Criston Cole and Aemond abandoned it, but she controlled the castle for only a few days. Once Aemond unexpectedly returned, Sabbatha had to leave and head back to the Twins. So yeah, the book had her take part in the war, but it never turned her into one of Rhaenyra's counselors. The position of Master of Coin also went to a different person. The series gave that office to Sir Torrhen Manderley, who survived the dance in the book, but never served Rhaenyra in that position. In Fire and Blood, Lord Bartimaeus Celtigar became her Master of Coin instead. That difference may look minor, but Bartimaeus played a major role in Rhaenyra's growing unpopularity because he raised taxes to extreme levels. The people eventually began to call her King Maegor with teats. For anyone unfamiliar with that insult, Maegor had been the third king of Westeros and had earned the name Maegor the Cruel. I mean, once your people compare you to that man, your financial policy has clearly gone very wrong. Criston Cole's death. Although Criston Cole fell to the Blacks beneath a storm of arrows in both versions, the series changed almost everyone regarding his death. In episode 6, Cole faced combined forces of House Tully and the Winter Wolves under Lord Oscar Tully and Roderick Dustin. In Fire and Blood, 3 different commanders confronted him. Roderick Dustin remained part of the scene, but Pate of Longleaf and Garibaldi Grey stood beside him instead of Oscar. Even Oscar's line about there never being enough bones of traitors originally belonged to Garibaldi Grey. The series had also aligned Oscar with Rhaenyra much earlier, whereas House Tully remained neutral in the book and joined her cause much later. Cole still offered to strike his banners if the opposing commander spared his men, but the request achieved nothing. In the book, a Riverlands bastard named Red Rob Rivers and his archers killed the Kingmaker. The series gave that act to a woman who became known as Alicent Blackwood, or Black Aly. Now this was another major character merge. Book Black Aly commanded House Blackwood's archers and ranked among the finest archers in the entire Black Army. However, Red Rob was considered even better and served under her command. The show basically combined their abilities and roles into one person, much as it had done elsewhere with characters such as Sharako Lohar and Rhaena Targaryen. After Cole fell in the book, Pate denied him the heroic legacy he wanted and declared, "I'll have no songs about how brave you died, Kingmaker. There's tens of thousands of dead on your account." The Blacks then removed Cole's head from his corpse. So yeah, the Kingmaker did not receive much dignity after death. Black Ally's role would also matter beyond this battle. By season 4, she was expected to hold considerable influence over Lord Cregan Stark of Winterfell, one of Rhaenyra's strongest supporters and her future husband. Alicent never agreed to slay her son. The series took Alicent and Rhaenyra's agreement much further than Fire and Blood ever did. Rhaenyra had already learned from Alicent that Helaena was a dreamer who could foresee events. When she noted that nobody had seen Vhagar at Harrenhal, Alicent explained that Helena's vision had placed Aemond inside the castle, but had never included his dragon. That meant Aemond had concealed himself within Harrenhal's walls, where an army would struggle to draw him out. According to Alicent, the only real option was to send someone inside with a sword, and that person was apparently meant to be Alicent herself. So yeah, Rhaenyra basically asked the Queen Dowager to assassinate her own son. Nothing close to this happened in the book. Alicent never traveled to Harrenhal and never made a deal with Rhaenyra to protect Helaena and Jaehaera in exchange for Aemond's death. She remained committed to the Green's cause until the end. Book Alicent eventually lost her mind though, which made the series' direction rather interesting. If she completed this journey to Harrenhal, the castle may well push her toward the same fate, if through a very different path. That's not how Aegon II found Sunfyre. Aegon and Larys' journey after their escape from King's Landing was never described in Fire and Blood, so the series had a lot of room to create its own version. I actually welcome that decision because the book revealed only that Larys had hidden Aegon on Dragonstone, right beneath Rhaenyra's nose. It was a smart choice, since Dragonstone was probably the last place the Blacks would have searched for. The series instead had Lord Mooten of Maidenpool pursue Aegon's group because he wanted Tyland to reveal where he'd hidden the crown's gold while he served as Master of Coin. Once Larys decided to leave, Aegon refused to flee again and chose to fight. His speech moved Tyland enough that he stayed beside him. Lord Mooten eventually found them, but Sunfyre made a surprise return and burned his forces before they could kill or capture Aegon. Book Mooten followed a completely different path. He had hosted Daemon, Nettles, and their dragons when Rhaenyra ordered him to kill Nettles, even though that would have violated guest right. With help from his maester, Mooten warned Daemon and allowed Nettles to escape. Daemon then left Harrenhal to await Aemond and Vhagar. That order destroyed Mooten's faith in Rhaenyra, so he raised Aegon's banners above Maidenpool. So yeah, the series turned a lord who had defected to Aegon into the man whose soldiers were burned by Aegon's dragon. The Black Dragons never attacked Sheepstealer. The entire sequence where the Black Dragons went after Sheepstealer was created for the series. Daemon finally caught up with Rhaena and demanded to know what the hell she thought she was doing. However, Rhaena had grown tired of her life as a hermit inside a cave and wanted to kill Vhagar. She believed that victory would repay at least a part of what she owed Rhaenyra after the Battle of the Gullet. Daemon then offered to join her quest, which borrowed from his book storyline with Nettles. Of course, Rhaena had already absorbed Nettles' role in the series, so this scene pushed that character merge even further. Sir Adam of Hull and Queen Rhaenyra soon arrived as well, which finally exposed Daemon's deception. Rhaenyra learned what he had done and discovered that the severed head that he had presented as proof of Sheepstealer's dead rider had belonged to some random man. I mean, Rhaenyra had plenty of reasons to be furious with Rhaena after her role in Prince Jace's death at the Gullet, yet she seemed even angrier that Daemon had lied to her and tried to cover up the truth. Corlys was never taken prisoner. The series completely changed Corlys Velaryon's situation because in Fire and Blood, he never left King's Landing. That meant Jon Roxton never captured him, and the Greens never mutilated Corlys to force Alan of Hull to follow their demands. The book did use similar threats, but it placed them upon different people. Alan was later warned that another close member of his family would be mutilated if he refused to cooperate with the Greens. However, the person under threat was not Corlys. Corlys also faced pressure from the Greens, although they didn't physically mutilate him either. Instead, they tried to control him through threats against someone he loved. So yeah, the series took two separate methods of coercion from the book and placed Corlys directly at the center of both, which made his ordeal more physical and personal. So yeah, folks, these, according to me, are the biggest 27 differences between the Fire and Blood novel and the House of the Dragon Season 3. If you feel I missed out on something, feel free to let me know in the comments. If you liked the video, please hit like, subscribe to our channel, and be sure to ring that notification bell so you don't miss any more of these marvelous videos. Stay safe, have a great day, and as always, stay marvelous.